In this Elden Ring Nightreign video, I'm going to be talking about the starter skills, the skills that each character starts with, as well as the skills that you can put on with relics. We're going to be going through how each of these works. I'm going to be telling you whether you should use it or not, and hopefully you get some good information out of this. I will be doing a separate video covering other skills, ones that you can pick up on dropped weapons, and we'll probably have another video on dormant powers at some point as well, going through those. Okay, getting into the skills themselves, I don't have a particular order to this. I'm not starting with the character skills. They're kind of mixed in here. But the first one we're going to take a look at is Bloodblade. You can put Bloodblade on your weapon with relics. And what this does is it shoots a physical damage projectile at modest range that does some blood buildup when it hits. Now, it may look terrible when you first start using it, and that's because you want to use this at melee range. The reason you want to use this at melee range is because it not only hits with projectile, but the weapon simultaneously. And if you're using a weapon like the Executor's Starter Sword that also has blood buildup, each swing that connects will also do bleed buildup, allowing you to trigger hemorrhage very rapidly. So if you're going to play with Bloodblade, you probably want to play on Executor because his weapon has default bleeding on it, and get point blank and spam this skill. So taking a look at Seppuku next, this is best on Executor. It's going to add physical damage to the weapon, 21 physical damage. It's going to add increased bleed buildup on the weapon, which will stack with the native bleed buildup of his weapon. And it will also trigger his passive effect, increasing his stamina recovery and attack power. So it's really, really strong on him, but the problem is that he loses health, and the buff only lasts 20 seconds. So you'd have to do this quite regularly, which can be difficult to do, but it's very, very effective. You probably wouldn't use this on another character simply because that passive effect from Seppuku on Executor is so strong. And he also starts with a blood loss buildup weapon by default. Next, we'll take a look at Flaming Strike. What this skill does is it shoots out a flame in front of you, and you follow up with an R2. You'll swing through it doing more damage and coating your weapon with 21 fire damage for about 20 seconds or so, if I'm not mistaken. Now, the issue with this is if you are playing on Wilder and you're using the relic that allows for his follow-up attack will override this buff with the plus 12 fire buff, so you'll lose out on that 9 damage. And since it's only 9 fire damage that you can use on Wilder, you can use this skill without costing FP basically, repeatedly, because especially if you have the extra charge. So I don't think Flaming Strike is worth it on Wilder, simply because he can do this for free and has almost as good anyway and will tend to override it. However, if you're playing like Revenant or Duchess, or someone who attacks very, very quickly, particularly those two, the damage, the plus 21 damage, is actually really, really strong. You can increase Revenant's total damage by a lot because her claws don't start out with that much, and the plus 21 is like a 40% increase in damage to her attacks, like right out of the gate, which is fantastic. And same with Duchess. Her Magic Dagger gives her plus 12 magic damage, but Flaming Strike gives her plus 21 fire, so that's actually more than she would get by using Magic Dagger, so it's a bit stronger in my opinion. Next, we take a look at Thunderbolt. This deals lightning damage. It's not very good in general. It gives you a ranged option, and that's nice, but it does low damage for the FP cost. There's not a great way to buff the damage of this. I mean, you could stack like lightning relics, lightning up relics to get more damage, but I don't think that's as good as just all-purpose damage relics like Everjails and things like that. So this is one that I just really don't recommend using in this game. Taking a look at Quick Step, this gives you an iframe dodge that's a short distance, and this is really best on Guardian, whose dodge is the worst in the game. But the issue with it is you can't put this on the shield, you can only put it on the starter weapon, and you typically replace the starter weapon because it's not that strong. And that means that if you put it on that weapon, then when you switch weapons, you're going to basically have wasted that relic part. So this is a really great skill if you can find it on another weapon for Guardian, or Bloodhound Step, which is like a better version even, because this gives him a chance to iframe through things, particularly if you're doing the Adele event boss. He has a tough time with some of those AoEs, even blocking them, they can go through his shield, but giving him an iframe dodge can help him get out of some of those sticky situations. Next, we'll take a look at Gravitas. This weapon skill has very good AoE, it has decent damage. It can connect with the weapon for extra damage, so if you are point blank on an enemy and you thrust the sword down into their foot or something, you'll get the damage of your weapon plus the AoE damage, so ideally you'd want to do that. The AoE itself does magic damage, the melee portion, if you connect with whatever your damage does per type with that weapon. And it has good poise too, so you can pull this off in the thick of enemies. This is not bad on like a Guardian or a Raider or something like that. Again, Guardian tends to replace his weapon skill, so he may not need this, but like on a Raider, if you want to get some AoE, it's not a bad option. Next is Lightning Slash. This is one of my personal favorites. It's got decent damage for a weapon skill. It's pretty good. It has a very long lightning buff. I think it's like 20 seconds or 30 seconds. Buffs your weapon with 21 lightning, and it's great for fighting lightning weak bosses. Adele is very resistant to lightning, so don't use him for the event currently. But it's a great way to get lightning and ensure you have lightning as a melee character if you're fighting like Dark Drift Knight or something, or maybe if you're fighting the Augur boss. Either one of those would be a great way to make sure that you have lightning damage for those fights. Rain of Arrows is absolutely excellent for any Iron Eye. If you could get the right relics and Rain of Arrows, it'd be ideal. I wouldn't sacrifice regular damage for Rain of Arrows most of the time, but this skill shoots up and lands with a bunch of arrows simultaneously. It's very good for big bosses like dragons and anything that's larger. Most of the end-of-day bosses are quite large, as long as you can get them to hold still. It's a great way to put out some burst damage and use your FP. As Iron Eye, a lot of times you're not using your FP because you can attack pretty quick with an R1 chain. And also status effect buildup can be very, very quick when using Rain of Arrows. So if you have poison or blood loss, frost, it's a great way to trigger that very, very quickly. Next up is Endure. This is the starting skill for Raider. Essentially what this does is it's going to increase your absorptions by about right around 50%, if I remember correctly, for the next hit that hits you, and it'll also give you increased poise, so you can swing through a hit and continue it. And it's a good skill against like end-of-day Night Lords or the end-of-run bosses where you're going to be in the thick of it and maybe your character skill is down and you can't use it, so you could use this instead. But I don't know if it's worth keeping a starter weapon when there are so many better starter skills out there, and I probably wouldn't use it on any other character than Raider. Next is Determination. This increases the damage of your next attack by 60%. And this was actually really strong in the base game, particularly for like jump attack builds and for charged heavy attack builds, trying to use like the biggest weapon you can, stack buffs, and then charged heavy attack for lots of damage and stance damage, but it's not that great in this game. Keep in mind that it's only the first hit of an attack chain or an R2, like if you're using Raider and he uses his charged R2 attack or charged heavy attack, he hits twice, only the first hit is buffed. So that's kind of disappointing. And it also doesn't apply to ultimate skills or character skills. Like if you do the Wilder grapple and then follow up with a flame attack, it doesn't buff that attack. It doesn't buff his ultimate, doesn't buff Raider's ultimate. If it buffed those ultimates, he could have been really strong. Next up is Hoarfrost Stomp, which is honestly one of my favorite skills in the game. It's in my Duchess build. And it's just really good for giving any character that doesn't have AoE some AoE, like Duchess, or maybe Executor, although Executor's ultimate is pretty good at AoE. Or, maybe you want some AoE on Wilder, it'd be good. It's just really, really strong in general. It sets Frostbite easily, which is the bulk of its damage, so if targets are already frostbitten, it drops off significantly. So I don't recommend always just spamming it, but it can give you a good ranged AoE option that can keep you safe, and it's good on just about any character. Next is Storm Stomp. This is good for AoE if you need AoE on a character. It deals terrible damage, but it does decent stance damage, and it interrupts enemies, and you can sometimes juggle like human bosses. You might put it on something like Guardian if his character skill is down, but if his character skill is up with an increased duration, you don't really need it, so it's probably one you won't build around. Next you have Poisonous Mist and Chilling Mist. These are great for multi-status effect builds because the mist puts the status effect or helps build up the status effect on bosses and enemies, coats your weapon, allowing you to do that status effect build up with attack. So if you have like Executor's got bleed on it, and then you take a relic and put poison on it, then you put Chilling Mist on it, you can actually get triple status effects. Or if you have, like Duchess with bleed and then you use Chilling Mist, you can get frost. Or, you can do poison on her and then Chilling Mist to get frost, or vice versa, you can put frost and Poisonous Mist to get poison. So it's good for multiple status effect builds, and it's definitely one, it's kind of meta right now for both Duchess and Executor when you're not facing the final boss, obviously. Next is Glintblade Phalanx. The primary function for Glintblade Phalanx in the original game was for stance breaks. And I think the reason that it doesn't see a lot of use is just because the characters that would benefit from it most are doing status effect builds. But it still has really strong status or stance breaking capabilities, and I think it's really good solo for stance breaking. Remember that you can do a follow-up after you cast it in order to slide into the enemy, and that follow-up stance damage is based on the weapon that you have equipped. Usually the larger weapon you have equipped, the more stance damage you're going to do. So make sure that if you are using Glint Blade Phalanx, that you're using that follow-up attack as much as you can in order to get more stance damage and help stance break bosses more quickly. It's also a great way to give you some range. The only real downside to this is if you have any piece of equipment that has Glint Blades on it, it will override this, or this will override that, so it's not good in that case. Next you have Sacred Blade, which is great for a ranged option if you're a melee character, and it buffs your weapon with holy damage. The projectile that fires out is 100% holy damage, which is great. And what's really nice about this is that the blade and projectile can both connect for damage if you're close enough. You can't spam it like you can Storm Blade or Blood Blade. It doesn't have this speed, so that is not really a strategy. But you can fire it off point blank to buff your weapon when your buff is down to rebuff your weapon with 21 holy damage. It's really good, again, against holy weak bosses like the first and last boss. And because it gives you 21 holy damage as a buff, it's a bit stronger than like Duchess's Magic Dagger if you want to buff with that. And it's a bit stronger than Wilder's Fire buff from the follow-up. Next you have Poison Moth Flight. I think this skill is being slept on, honestly. With the amount of poison that's out there right now, particularly with the event boss being weak to poison, I don't think enough people are using this. Because typically Duchess, Executor, and maybe even Iron Eye are running poison builds for that boss. But what this skill does is it not only does some poison buildup when you use it, but it will rip off the poison on a boss or character in order to do burst damage. So this is really, really strong because what this does is it allows you to reapply poison. Now, like if you're fighting Adele, you probably don't want to pull the poison off of them. That's probably not the greatest idea unless this skill deals just tons of damage when you do it. I'd have to try it to be sure. But if you're facing other bosses and you and another character in your group are sitting poison, you can't set multiple stacks of poison simultaneously. So if you poison it, rip it off, poison it, rip it off, poison it, rip it off, it can work really, really well, particularly if you have like bleed on your weapon with like Executor, so you're getting bleed procs too while you attack. That can work really well. Just keep in mind that if you're using anything that gives you increased damage while you're fighting poisoned enemies, you might want to leave that poison on. But the relic that gives you an attack power buff when an enemy is poisoned, you can trigger this repeatedly by using this skill, which is really nice. Note that it doesn't apply to Scarlet Rot, and it won't trigger Scarlet Rot. Next is Prayerful Strike. This is an excellent skill for AoE healing. It will heal you and allies that are near you, including the summons of Revenant, which is really good. Unfortunately, Revenant can't use this as a default skill, or it could actually be really strong for her. But essentially what it's going to allow you to do, you probably use this on like a Raider, or maybe even a Wilder, but probably a Raider, is you'll just tank through hits and you'll heal up afterward because of the poise you have on this skill and because of the amount it heals you, and probably stack like taking damage increases your attack power so that you can just get more damage. The problem with this skill is that it's very FP expensive, meaning you can't use it too many times before you run out. So it's really nice, but I don't know how many people are going to use it simply because of the FP cost. Next is Eruption. This is a really strong skill that has decent damage and decent AoE for the amount of FP cost that it does. It has higher damage on higher attack rating weapons, so you probably get more out of it on a Raider than you would on a Wilder or a Guardian. But it can still give you some AoE on a Guardian or a Wilder or a Raider if you need it, which is really nice. And a lot of the regular bosses are weak to fire, which is great. And this can also be a good one to have if you're fighting the Ice Dragon, since that boss is very weak to fire. White Shadow's Lure is one that I think is best used solo. It's the starting skill on Revenant, and it can distract an enemy for a very short amount of time, freeing you up. And that can be great if you have allies out that are wailing on a boss while you're attacking on a boss. But if you're playing in multiplayer, aggro's going to be bouncing around from other characters as well, and you could be doing something else with your time rather than spam casting this, or the duration of it is so short that I don't think it's probably the best one. I don't recommend building around it, but it may have a use in, solo play, particularly early on in a run before you find a better weapon or better weapon skill. Next is Stamp Upward Cut, which is a starting weapon of Wilder. This is actually, I think, a slept-on skill. It's got two real uses. First of all, when you do the stamp part of it, you actually reduce the damage you take significantly. So it can be good for, poising through an attack or taking damage and not taking as much. And then the follow-up does decent damage and good stance damage, and sometimes can knock humanoid enemies into the air, knocking them down, giving your team like an opening to go to town on them. So it's a very, very good skill. There are you know, other good skills out there. So I don't know if I would build around this, but you absolutely could, and you would probably be fine. Next is Charge Forth, which is the starting skill on Guardian. And this is good at gap closing. It can get you back into melee range very quickly from far away, but it does lock you into an animation, which can be bad sometimes. It does knock like humanoid enemies down as well sometimes, so it gives you a good opening to attack. But the really bad thing about this weapon skill is that, like, let's say you put a status effect on your weapon like Bleed or Poison or Frost. The multiple hits from the charge don't actually help trigger it more quickly. In fact, it seems to do almost zero status buildup in my testing at all. Or if it does, it's such a little amount that I can't tell. So if you were thinking, oh, I'll use the multiple hits to trigger status effects, think again, because that is not working. I don't know if that's working as intended. Next is Magic Dagger. This is the starting skill on Duchess. This buffs her weapon with plus 12 magic damage for about 20 seconds or so. It also deals a little bit of damage. Although in my experience, the long windup is probably not worth the damage that that skill does, putting yourself at risk of being hit. So you probably want to buff outside melee range most of the time with this one. But the plus 12 magic damage is weaker than both Flaming Strike and Sacred Blade. So if you like the buff damage attack, I would recommend going with one of those instead. Especially since those deal more damage in general as a skill. Like you can use Sacred Blade more easily at range and still hit with it. Or Flaming Strike, you can, hit in an AoE. And lastly is Unsheath, and this is Executor's starting weapon. This is a very strong skill in the base game, and I think it's probably very strong here as a solo Executor, and it's probably slept on by a lot of people in general. The real benefit of this weapon is the stance damage that the R2 attack does. The R1 is faster, and it's good for just getting damage quickly, but considering how fast you can chain your R1s, I'm not sure it's worth using R1 all that often unless you're trying to hit multiple enemies. But the R2 is where it's at. It deals significant stance damage, which allows you to get critical hits on bosses more easily. So spamming this can be a valid strategy if you're not going for the kind of meta status effect build and you want to just go for stance breaks and maybe critical hits. Like you can build that way if you want. Keep in mind that the Transient Moonlight skill on the Moonlight or the Moonveil Katana is very similar to this in the way that it operates, but it also has a wave of projectile, magic projectile that goes out. So if you're using that katana, keep in mind that it works very similarly to Unsheath, and you should be using that R2 when you can to deal magic damage and stance damage. So that wraps up our video on character starting skills and starting skills you can put up on relics. I hope you guys learned something on this one, and I hope I got them all. I haven't seen any other ones. Maybe there's like one I missed. If I did, let me know in the comments, and I'll put a little sticky explaining how to use it. But you can make some very strong builds with starting skills, and I think the argument to use them is really to have a more consistent run, because sometimes you get really good weapons and sometimes you get crap. And when you have a starting skill in your weapon that you plan to upgrade and use the whole time, it gives you more reliability, particularly when you master how to use that starting skill. As always, if there's things I didn't mention in this video, you can mention them, or if you have questions about some of these skills, let me know in the comments. Would you guys like to see another video about this for the other skills that can drop on other weapons and how to do them? There's a lot of them, so that might be a longer video. Let me know in the comments below.